All right. So Matt's gonna cheat and get something from the freezer aisle. It sounds like, and we're gonna have burgers. I win. But yeah. So sorry that you had to hear my abuse of my poor husband there. He's a trooper. He really is. Let's see. Let's see. All right. Everybody's here. If you're not here, raise your hand. Okay. Excellent. So what I've got, for those of you who joined after I said so, in the chat is a little link to a document that is, it's kind of like just a guided, rundown of what I'm going to cover here. And if you want to follow along, that's fine. And, download it, keep it, whatever you want to do with it. A lot of this is going to be going over some of the tutorials that I had on on Tumblr. So that kind of stuff will always be up and always be available. I'm not going to get rid of it. I spent too much time on it. I love it too much. But we'll be going over that stuff too. So there'll be links for that stuff in the document. And for more stuff, if you guys aren't on there, I think most of you guys are on there. I have my Storyteller Sanctuary server on Discord here. It's new as of last month, and the only way you can get access to it is to subscribe to a newsletter through Varlv.com or be one of my patrons on Patreon. And I make sure that you guys are upgraded to the booster level, which is the quote-unquote patron level. So yeah, again, if you're here and you want to go over there, there'll be a link I can shoot you, or I'll probably just end up putting it in general, so you can just head on over there. So yeah, with that said, I'm gonna go over to this little document guy, and whee, look at all that stuff. I see a bunch of people. You guys are a bunch of little animals, so cool. All right. So this, I'm gonna start off. A lot of this is actually going to be based on just good storytelling to start here. A lot of you, I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence. I know a lot of you start out writing stories different ways, and I know that we all have our own preferences for that. So if you see something here that you like, feel free to steal it and use it. If you see something here that you don't like, feel free to not use it. This is all up to you. This is just, a lot of this is how I do it, and basic structure for this kind of stuff. So if you want to write a comic, or if you want to write, again, some of this stuff goes into other things. If you want to write, like a really detailed story, you might find some useful tips in here too. Because again, this is how I do a lot of things, and we'll get into it. But for the most part, it kind of goes in phases. This little tutorial, so there'll be parts that you can just start doing. And it gets more advanced as it goes, and as it goes on, you might find, well, it's a little bit difficult. There's a learning curve to making comics, and that's okay. So just get it started. Just feel free to take these tips, as I share them, and use them or don't use them. It's fine. It's good. Whatever you want to do. So yes, you're very welcome for the doc. My pleasure. So again, without insulting anybody's intelligence, I think most of us here as writers, we are very familiar with the 3-act structure. So the 3-act structure is the most basic way to write a story. 3 acts: the inciting incident, the midpoint, and the climax. So you get these parts down probably when you're first coming up with a story. So say you've got an idea to make a comic, you don't know what that comic is going to be about, you're probably going to start with these 3 things. You will have the incident or the conflict, what happens when the characters, engage that conflict, and what happens afterwards. Do they win or lose? So I have it lined out here pretty easily. The characters have a problem, the characters go on a journey, and the conflict is resolved. A good or bad ending. Sometimes they don't triumph. Sometimes they lose, and it is very sad. But sometimes we have stories like that, and that's okay. So that's, again, basic, not to, insult your intelligence. The dramatic structure takes that a step further, takes it and kind of doubles it, as a matter of fact. Here we have a little, you'll see this illustrated so many ways on like Google, to show that it is like a little zigzagging kind of a graph. It kind of, in a lot of ways, it looks like a roller coaster, you know, going to the top and then going down again. So that's the idea here. It's a little bit more structured with the idea of the pace of it and what gets covered in just a little bit more detail. So if you go from this, your next step is probably going to be outlining these things. So once again, we have the exposition. And this is, you know, in so many ways, kind of mirroring these. So we have the exposition, the midpoint, and the denouement. That's that weird French word there. It's the falling action, so to speak, in a story. So the exposition is just exposing the world, exposing, you know, the ideas behind it, you know, getting the story set up. I have it over here saying the characters are existing. They exist in their world. And we find out what that world is, who they are, in so many ways. We might already know them, we might not. I always recommend, even if you do know the characters, even if it's fan fiction, even if it's familiar, if you're going to go in for a really long haul, establish who your characters are, where they're at this point. Your Nathan might be in a different place in his life than my Nathan, and canon Nathan, and for that reason you might want to explain where he is in his head, where he is with life in general, and all that kind of stuff. You know, is the world changed? Is stuff the same? You know, could you fall into this story from canon or not? You know, you're going to want to set that up and assure the audience that, you know, that's where you're coming from. The inciting incident, again, here comes the conflict. Again, the characters have a problem, so these 2 points are exposition points. Here comes the midpoint, the rising action. The characters go on a journey. The climax to that, the characters face the conflict. And here again, maybe they win, maybe they lose. So we don't know that maybe at this point, but now would be a good time to figure that out. Falling action, the characters deal with the consequences after the climax has been resolved, and the resolution. And the characters go back into the little circle of existence, and they're dealing with everything that has happened to them at this point. So again, you guys probably are very familiar with this. If you don't write stories this way, give it a go, give it a try. I definitely start out with something that in my head looks more like this. It might be on its way to this, and then I'll sit down and I actually will kind of write out, you know, the basic points, and these are very big plot points. And I do this for the overall story arc. So what I mean by that is if a Death comic is got a storyline that's going to run 4 issues, that's this whole thing, and that's this whole thing. So all 4 issues have to start and have an end, start and end. I'm not doing anything separating the issues out or anything like that yet. That's how it goes. From there, I will take each individual issue and I will at least do this for those. So I will break up, you know, the points in between where those things are going to happen, and I'm going to start setting up the script that way. That said, it doesn't always look like this once I break down those issues, right? So issue one might be these 2 points. It might be the exposition and inciting incident, and maybe a little rising action. And then maybe issue 2 is nothing but rising action. And maybe issue 3 is nothing but rising action. And maybe there's a little bit of climax in issue 3. Finally, in issue 4, we better get to the climax, the falling action, and the resolution, though. So, but again, it's nice to kind of break things up so that you can kind of keep on task, knowing what needs to be accomplished, and have fun filling in the structure as you go. Comics are great for this kind of work. I always recommend getting started as soon as you can, if you're comfortable with that, because you just have a lot of time. It takes time to draw, it takes time to write, it takes time to put one of these things together, and I always get ideas as I go. So, you know, it's one of those things. You don't have to have everything figured out, because you're in it for the long haul regardless, and it might motivate you actually to do it that way, and you might end up coming up with better ideas as you go, as I often do with Death Comic. Death Comics would look very different if I wrote this much out and then I magically snap my fingers or AI'd it or whatever, and it just churned it out, it would look totally different from what comes out. And I like to believe it would look worse because I do put in a lot of time thinking things through, and I have a lot of aha moments over the course, and that kind of thing only takes time to go out and drive in the country a while and mull over these points. You will have long thoughts, as I'm sure we all have, in the shower as we sit there and try to think, how the heck am I going to resolve this thing? And maybe you don't know. And that's okay, because with a comic, it's, like I said, it's going to take time anyway. So work ahead as much as you can, but get started as soon as you can. Even if you've only got so far as like the first issue, so long as you have the whole structure lined up to, you know, a relatively bare bones part like this, I think you're safe to start. I always am. I don't have every single piece figured out by then. So do we have any questions so far? And again, feel free to chat, guys, or feel free to talk on your mics. I don't care. Either one's good. I have a kitty at my window. Come on, kitty. Come on, kitty. Oh my god. He doesn't want to come in. What a dork. Kitty dork. Anywho. Alright. So, cool. If you guys get that and you can still hear me, that's great. The next part, I know you're going to probably get on YouTube, and if you ask YouTube how to write a comic, they're going to tell you do this. They're going to tell you, well, they're probably going to tell you to do what we just went over, which is, you know, get your structure down, you know. But then they're going to tell you get each page down. So you can set it up like this. Now, Death comics are 22 to 27 pages long, depending. Most comics are 24 pages. Varulf's are 24 pages because, again, it's a print comic. I like to keep it in structures of 4. That's a tip. If you're doing a print comic, we like 4s because each page is 4 pages, technically. Each printed saddle stitch page is 4 pages. There's a front, middle front, back front, and a back. So if that makes any sense, I can lay that out for you too. But anyway, page number, however many you're going to have, if it's a professional comic, probably going to be 24 per issue. So a lot of professional comic book authors do this. They set up the pages where on one column you have page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 24 pages. And then on the sides here, we're breaking up what we have up here in our little dramatic structure. So on page 1, right, the author will, you know, spitball something. We see a character A and B sitting on a hill, enjoying the sunny day. They have some small talk. Then page 2, the character's small talk is interrupted as a comet enters Earth atmosphere. Oh no. And then it just goes on like that until the very end, when everybody gets drunk. So that's all the more you would have to do for something like that. Each of these little areas, you know, filling in every page with these tiny details to tell you how the story is going to play out on that page. That's a great way to do it. I don't always have this much done. I gotta be honest with you. A lot of times I just have, you know, for this update. So for Death Comic, maybe I'll say, you know, it's in, God, how many parts are Death Comics? Like the second one was 4 or 6 parts, you know, 4, 5, and 6 parts split up. So 4, 5, or 6 chapters, I should say. So per chapter, maybe I would have this. So chapter 1, we see these characters and that character doing something. Chapter 2, this happens, that kind of thing. That's fine too, if you want to lay it out that way. Just, again, it's fleshing out this a little bit more. So however you do it, again, it's up to you. It's fine. A lot of people find this structure really freeing. They know exactly what's happening. And the nice thing about this is if you take the time to do it, you can kind of move things around page to page. And especially if you're starting out, that might be a huge help to you. I've been doing this for a long time, and I can kind of be a little more freeform and a little more shoot from the hip when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I can kind of recognize when a pacing problem is going to happen, or when I don't know, when something's going to look wrong, because I've been doing it for so long, I see it in my head pretty easily. And that's where you want to get to with this kind of stuff. And I promise, comics, just like anything, just like writing, just like art or something, that if you practice it enough, you're going to get good at that kind of stuff too. And you can just, you know, just bang, 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 do it on the fly. So however it works for you, I do recommend this method if you want to sit down That way you know what you have to draw, and you just take it in chunks and say, okay, today I'm going to sit down and draw page one. Today and tomorrow, maybe today and tomorrow I'm going to knock out page 1 and 2, however you want to do it. Maybe I want to do the whole chapter, so like I do, I'll sit down to like 6 pages, I'll lay them all out in thumbnails, and then I'll go in and work on each one out of order, in order, whatever I feel like at the time. Maybe one panel is way more interesting for me to draw that day than another, so instead of getting bummed out, I will tackle a page that I really want to do, or I will tackle a panel that I really want to do. It's all about working with your own brain, because comics are that much work. There are days I don't want to do a damn thing. I will sit there and go, oh my god, this page is so blank. How dare? And that's all I'll do, is sit there and stare at it. But there's always one. There's always one. If you commit to like 30 minutes, I guarantee it, you'll probably sit down for a little longer than that, first of all. And second of all, even if you won't, you will have tried to put in 30 minutes, and you will feel better about that. That's how my brain always works. So again, I try to cheat and do things like that I want to do, panels that I want to do, pages that I want to do, and see how much of that I get done, because there are going to be some boring pages. Sometimes pages are just not exciting. Sometimes you have 2 people tied to a chair for 2.5 issues, and it's just the most obnoxious thing to sit down and say, I want to draw this, because they're not fucking doing anything. They're just sitting there. So, not that I know from experience. But, yeah, so I mean, like, do that, trick your brain, however it works for you. Just get it done and sit down to it, and get going on it. Again, I usually don't have much more than this. It's somewhere between this and the actual script, and that's the next part of this. So if you're going to go from here, your pages, all laid out with their little beats, their story beats all lined up with what's going on what page, your next step is to script it out. Here again, I don't script out very much. This is an example of something I would be handed if I was an artist on a comic book, and the writer has given me the script over to start drawing. It's very typical to see things this way. Now, certain writers do things differently. Some will have more or less stuff, that they want to see than others. Some will have more direction than others. Some will have less. Some will trust the artist. It's pretty typical, if you've worked with a writer for a while, to just kind of get comfortable with them and say, okay, that what I want here. Can you just show character A and B, and here's the dialogue, and they might let you figure it out from there. But here's a very common example of a script. So page 1, 3-panel layout. Panel 1, largest panel on the page, establishing shot of character A and character B sitting on a grass-covered hill. It is a pleasant day. The sun is shining. These are all important details. I need to draw them. This is the writer telling me, these have to be in the panel. I could possibly put more things in there. Maybe there's a tree in the background. Maybe there's a waterfall in the background. He hasn't mentioned that, so I assume it's not important. I should also be reading the whole script ahead of time so that I might catch these things and get it in my head what I'm going to be drawing before. But either way, paying attention to these details are important. Panel 2, character B in close-up. Panel 3, we're just behind character A as they look to the sky. The clouds are parting, and we catch a glimpse of the oncoming comet. So you can see there's also dialogue in here. As an artist, you're going to have to be responsible for dialogue. Dialogue can take up a lot of space, and again, this format might be good for you. And in fact, I do a little scripting because of this reason. I don't do a lot, but I do a little bit. Sometimes I know exactly what a character is going to say. Sometimes I know a character is going to need to say a lot, so it's easier to write this out. Either way, if I know what they're saying, or I know they're going to be talking for a while, like Charles, then I'm going to probably do a script like this, and that'll help me as the artist determine how it's going to lay out in the panel. Also, it's probably going to help me determine which panels are going to be larger than others. Some panels, because of the amount of dialogue involved, need to be bigger. Some panels need to be split up. As the artist/author, that's my call to make. Some dialogue needs to get cut down. It's just the way it is. A lot of times I just don't have the dialogue written, and I write it after I've drawn it, because the idea comes ahead. We call that the Marvel method. Now, that comes from Stan Lee back in the olden days, and Kirby and all those guys, they'd get together in the bullpen. Stan would come up with an idea, say, hey, Jack, go draw, 22 pages of Spider-Man you know, fighting this guy, and then, you know, he doesn't win at the end, and, you know, the city is doomed. I don't know. But he would do that. You know, Kirby would go off and do it, bring it back. Stan would be like, that's great. And Stan would put the dialogue in, you know, and they'd have a comic. And that's how it would work. So I kind of tend to do it that way, because I'll look at something, I'll read it, so long as it, you know, follows the trajectory that I was going. I can pretty easily come up with the dialogue in my head. You might not be able to do that, and that's okay. This kind of scripting does help, and it helps a lot. The more of this that you can do, guys, like if you bother to do this stuff, and then you bother to script it out for yourself, you're going to have an easier time. It's just planning, and some people's brains, you know, especially mine, they relax when they see things like this, like, okay, that's done. I can work off of that. I know what I need to do. It's clearly laid out, good to go. But if you don't work that way, or you're a little more freeform, that's okay too. But the more of this you do, I think the easier you're going to have it on yourself. So if you want to plan ahead and do that, that's great. And if you find that you don't want to do that and you just want to get it done, that's fine too. It's all up to you. The potential for plot holes and missed dialogue and stuff like that is high if you do it this way, so be warned for that. But I always look at it this way. I don't see plot holes as problems. I see them as opportunities to explain something down the line. So maybe you've just given yourself a new angle to work with a character if they say something wrong, or, you know, maybe you have to explain it later now. It can be very interesting to work in comics this way. But again, I don't know. I've lived so long now that I just don't even sweat plot holes. They are opportunities to explain something, and I look at them that way. So feel free to do it that way. Or the other thing is this: it's the internet, and especially with fan fiction, nobody cares. Go in and change it. Just so many times that I've gone back and changed Death Comic because I didn't like the way that the dialogue sounded, or I got questions about, you know, like, what does that mean, or what is this? Just go in and change it. It's fine. Make it clearer for the next guy who reads it. Nobody cares. It's fine. All right. Any other questions here? See, Neo's got some stuff here. Yeah, honestly, absolutely. Okay, so we're talking about themes here. Neo's writing down some themes that are going to work in a Rory story, I'm going to assume. We've got a great opportunity to weave themes into these things. Now, I want to tell you why you guys don't have to worry about that kind of stuff until you're ready to. You might have a theme already picked out for your story, and if that's the case, awesome, outstanding. You know, feel free to roll with that. I don't work that way because I tend to look for themes as the story goes on. So the good thing about comics, again, you have a lot of time, and theme and metaphor and these little nuances, these little things that make stuff so interesting to read. You have plenty of time to figure those out as you work. And you don't have to figure them out off the bat if you don't know them, or if you're just trying to, you know, spice it up as you go. You're going to be working on this thing for a while, and your brain's going to be turning, and you're going to be going, oh, wow, I see an opportunity to explain this. You know, I see an opportunity to showcase a little bit of this character's connection with this. I see an opportunity to put a little backstory in here about, you know, what happened. Anytime that you come up with these little gaps where you don't quite know, you might, and how many times has this happened to all of us? I'm sure plenty. If you don't know where something is going or how to do something, two things that I encourage you to do. Consider writing something that has to do with the character's theme, or their backstory, or some part of them that's otherwise hidden, that's not right there on the surface. Don't just have them sitting there saying nothing, you know, or just making idle talk. There's always, I guarantee if you don't know what a character should be saying, or it's just not interesting to you, or it just feels like blah, 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 either cut it out or have it be a reveal of something deeper. Never waste dialogue. So that's a storytelling point that we all know anyway. But themes and stuff like that, can be quite powerful, and the time to weave them in is as it goes, and you finding, you know, little gaps where you could be hinting at something going on that's a little deeper. And don't be afraid of doing that. There's always time to tie it back together. I guarantee it. Doing comic strips is great too, Neil. I like comic strips because easily digestible. I started doing Death Comic because these stories in my head are, you know, pretty grandiose. They're huge, and they go on, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of lore, and there's a lot of backstory. That being the case, it's hard to sell that as a fan fiction. I've done it before, and it's fine, but it's hard because people don't want to sit down. Not everybody wants to sit down to a fan fiction that's going to go on for 250,000 words. Some of us love it. I personally love it, but that's not everybody. And the thing about it is, the more accessible you can make a fan fiction, the more people are going to want to read it. And that's just the way that it is. And one of the best ways that you can make something very accessible is to put some art on it. And that also, you know, creates interest too. So I think comics are very interesting, and I think they're a great way of telling a story. And the more digestible you can make your comics, the better. Death Comic's going on, you know, over 200 pages now, and you know, what are we up to? Like 230 some pages if you consider all of them. And that's a lot. That's a lot of comic to read. So yes, you can do that, but it's kind of, you know, it's turning into the thing that I was trying to avoid, which is, you know, being too inaccessible for people. So is there a cost of entry with Death Comic now? Yeah, kind of. But comic strips are great, and that's why I like to post also on Tumblr. That's the kind of stuff that makes people think that they could read Death Comic, and I really, truly hope that they do, already knowing the characters, even if they haven't read the whole thing. And again, I'm eventually going to get on the wiki and write summaries out because, yeah, it's a lot, and I respect that and I understand that. But if you guys just want to do comic strips, they're a great way for people to get introduced to your cast that they might not know. Little, you know, even one panel, you know, comics, you know, gags where somebody's, you know, kicking back something to another character. You know, that stuff is funny. I mean, how many times we do that in the question and answers? I used to do it all the time. Now I've, you know, run out of time to do it as much as I wanted to. But, yeah, that kind of stuff's great. You know, do that. That's totally awesome. Outstanding. All right. Back to this stuff. So, we're talking about, like, themes and stuff. The time to think about themes, as we go through the dramatic structure even, you might start to notice some themes popping up or potentials for themes. I've talked about Death Comic 2 and Death Comic 3, you know, having the central themes of the impossible task and, you know, imposter syndrome and things like that. And then there's little themes interwoven in between, you know, the characters themselves. You know, sometimes, you know, colors will signify a change in a character's association. Sometimes, you know, little things that were brought up in dialogue are going to show up in, you know, in the background. Sometimes, you know, we're going to tie something together that somebody said that, you know, is going to end up being compounded on or, you know, explained later. Or my personal favorite, it's just recurring later. That kind of stuff, if you want to keep an eye out for it, after you get your structure, feel free to like interject those little things as you see them forming. You might look over the whole thing and say, oh my goodness, this story is about everybody is going through X, Y, or Z. So you're going to want to emphasize those points, you know. Maybe everybody's got imposter syndrome, you know, in your comic, that's, or your story. That's fine. That's kind of how I came up with it. They're like, just all going through the same kind of thing, different versions of it, but there's a common thread there. So we emphasize those things, and they come out making the story feel that much more tied together and that much more concise, and everything kind of belonging in that story. So I love that. Tie in your themes as you can, and you don't have to have them right off the bat. In fact, like I said, I usually don't. I write the story, then I see what's cooking, and then I go, oh, oh, it's about this. Oh, that's the lesson here. So, you can go back in, and as you write it and as you script it and as you draw it, you can pepper the story with that kind of thing and really emphasize those points. And any times that you're stuck for dialogue, maybe instead of sitting a character there saying, oh, gee, you can have them say something that ties into the theme. And it just makes the narrative that much stronger. So I love that stuff. We were talking about this a minute ago. God, we were in, I think we were in the Jimmy forums, and we were talking about static characters, dynamic characters, and characters and how they change, or not, and whether or not they do, that's fine. I'm going to get into it in a minute, but a lot of this has to do with what kind of a story you're telling, high concept or low concept. So let's go over the character points, because characters are going to be a great other way of you to write out your stories and figure out how your story's going to, come together, and you might see your characters as the driving force in the whole comic, and that's great if you do. So static characters, we talked about this, but if you're not familiar, that's cool. They change very little throughout the course of the story. We have the example of Bob's Burgers. The Belchers are pretty much the same people, episode 1 to episode 1000. They don't change very much, let's be honest. There's a little bit here, but I mean, for crying out loud, Louise doesn't even show the top of her head the whole way through. Even, by the end of it, she's still got her ears. It's, it's ridiculous. It's wonderful, but that's an example of static characterization. So everything's kind of set back to the status quo, episode to episode. It's episodic, is another way of putting it. Dynamic characters change significantly throughout the course of the story. So I've got the example of Brooklyn here. Brooklyn is God, if you're following the Gargoyles comic now, especially, this. Brooklyn is the poster child of dynamic characterization. He starts out being, just a young guy, in Goliath's clan of gargoyles, and literally goes through a time hop, comes out of it within the same 3 issues, having traveled through time, 40 years, I believe, with a mate and 2 kids, and is this big, brutish guy, and he's got an eye patch in the comic, but Brooklyn is literally a completely different guy at that point, but time travel will do that to you. So it's you can still see shades of him. Certainly, he's still the same guy, but he's quite changed, and as the story builds up, it was going to go that way even before the time skip, or the time dances, as it's called in the Gargoyles universe. Brooklyn starts out as just, one of the trio of gargoyles, younger gargoyles in the Manhattan clan. And at one point, Goliath picks him as his second in command. And you can see a change in that episode of him taking on that responsibility. And the episodes that follow after, he takes on more and more of it. And he fails through a few things, and he stumbles through a few things. And he grows, and he grows significantly. And all the characters in Gargoyles do this. They're all very dynamic characters. They grow up. They grow worse. They live. They die. They get married. They have kids. It's brilliant. And I love that kind of thing. So, and then let's look at our favorite show here. It's kind of a mix. We've got a bunch of dumbasses, and 1,000 episodes later, they are still dumbasses, but they're in a temple now. I mean, that's all the more I can put to that. Like, for the most part, do they change? I think internally, yes. I think it's a deceptive show. I think the show itself would make you believe that they haven't, but, and maybe this is just, fandom wank, I don't know. But I think that it's more nuanced how they change. And while they, by and large, do reset every episode, I think that there are little bits, especially with Nathan's character. I think that he's one who's, really kind of, more human, because he does have a little bit more of a dynamic kind of an output than the rest of them. I think a lot of the static perceptions of these characters have to do with the network's desire to see them one way versus the creative team's desire to see them to another. So, but we'll get into that in a minute too. But again, are they one of the other? I think they're a little bit of both. They're pretty static, but they're a little bit dynamic too, and certainly more so some than others. So, and what we were just talking about, this leads into high concept story. A high concept story is a story with continuity, lore, and significant world building. The cast is probably dynamic, and the setting is probably fantastic, or fantasy in some way. Doesn't have to be. They can be real life stories a lot of ways, but this is most common in in fictional settings where it's complete fantasy and huge world building goes into it. Again, it can take place in a real world setting, but doesn't often. A low concept story is a story that begins and ends with the cast and the world largely unchanged or reset episode to episode. So episodic, we're talking Bob's Burgers. The Simpsons is famous for its continuity and or not its continuity. Certain things, have great continuity. The things do not. It just depends on what you're going for in your storytelling here. That said, what we were talking about with Death Comic, Death Comic is more high concept than the canon material. Similarly, Death Clock themselves are pretty static, but the supporting cast is dynamic. In a lot of ways, the stories focus on things happening to the canon cast and to the people around them, dealing with how unmoved they all are by these events. So Death Clock remains, just completely, static the whole time, possibly because of their own stupidity, possibly not. And other people around them have to deal with them. 2, Death Comic is updated incrementally. Since it's a fan comic, I try to give everyone a little time each update. To that end, it's easiest to break it down like this. So I'm going to go into how I structure Death Comic. But this is the concept behind Death Comic. One day we're drinking coffee, the next day it's the end of the world. So that's how it goes. It's a little heavier, I think, than the canon material. I mean, the movie accepted, of course. But yeah, I think the point with a lot of the humor that makes Metalocalypse such an interesting show is that Death Clockers is so completely unmoved by these huge events going on around them. And you do get the sense that they're not really okay with it. They're pretending, and they're hiding in their very, very expensive domain that keeps them shielded from these things, and the people around them who keep them shielded from these things, while the people around them and the world around them has to deal with that and them. So that's, again, part of the humor in it all. Any questions so far? That was a lot. My husband. I know, me too. I'm still in love with him. I love him. I love Katana. I love what he has become. I love what he was. Yes. Everything about Brooklyn. Yes. Yeah, yep, I remember that. Then we have a lot of, and I looked through a lot of that, a lot of characters. I think it's a very popular thing to do in fan fiction, especially, is to turn things dynamic when they're not, and that's great. I love it, and I think that's why we read, so much, because largely these idiots are unmoving and unfeeling in so many ways, and we get to explore that because we don't have to bow to any corporate entity saying no. So please do that. Yeah, write it dynamic, guys, if you want to. There's no shame. It's just a different way of doing it. You don't have to. Anybody who tells you that you have to follow rules in fan fiction is a liar, and you should yell at them not to do that. So yeah, like I said, with Death Comic, it's a little bit more, high concept. The characters, there's a lot more of them. There's a lot more happening. I feel the canon cast, actually has a few more feelings. Do things reset at the end? Kind of. They go back to the status quo of the canon material. Will I kind of let them grow a little bit more? Absolutely. I think that you get to see little glimpses of that, or at least my intention is you can see those glimpses into those deeper aspects of the characters in the comic. because I can't not write it that way. It's just the way that I want to write it. Otherwise, I'd have a completely boring story that I would hate. But it does reset a bit because, you know, it's Deathclock and they have to. That said, along with the fact that Death Comic being incrementally updated, and because it's a fan comic and I can do this, and I almost have to do this because otherwise, I don't think I could get away with doing too many, you know, Talismans of the Doomstar type stories where it's just the girls and that's it. They have their own, you know, fan base and whatnot, and I love that and I appreciate that, but I think a lot of people would get tired of that real quick. So we have to bring it back in a little bit, and I do try to give everybody, and it's a lot because I've got, you know, 10, 12, in the next one, what, like 20 some main characters to keep track of. So I try to give as many of them very, very main cast, the core cast, which is, you know, Deathclock and Banshee, each an appearance. They get an appearance. Everybody else maybe not. So I don't think that there's an instance where I did not give somebody in the main cast an appearance, with the exception of the very beginning of Death Comic 2, because we didn't get introduced to Eden until a little bit into it, and I think that's it. So yeah, even so, that being said, I find this structure, when we were talking about, you know, these things up here and how you want to set up the pages and how you want to set this up, again, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 all the way to 24. Go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, however you want to do it. I find whatever you're doing over here, when you're dealing with that many characters, and especially if you're trying to get everybody to appear, you're going to split it up thusly, where, okay, what are character A and B doing? And then we'll continue on with what character A and B's story is here. Characters C, D, E, and F are here. This page is for characters G and H. Then they're going to go back to characters A and B. But now characters I and J show up. And then the final page, back to characters C, D, E, and F. So these guys are together. Okay, these guys are together in these pages. These guys are together. These guys are together. These guys who are here are now with these guys. So now they're a group. And we're back to this group who was here. So it's, again, it's a lot. But if you break it up like that and you start to, you know, get these little stories together cohesively, the best way to do it, I think, is to separate out by character. It's just the way that I found I work the best, when, you know, knowing I'm probably going to have 5 to 7 pages per chapter to do it. This was the easiest way for me to structure that. So again, that's storytelling, but it helps a lot, and that's a lot of how Death Comic comes through. How I keep it all sorted, because I just couldn't otherwise. I'd just cry. I'd cry and cry, and it'd be terrible, and we'd never get a comic. Here's a different one. For Varulv, I do it quite differently. Varulv is also a high concept story. Its characters are also dynamic. Kel is the main character, in quotes, but I can be a little less worried about focusing on only him or only the main pack of werewolves due to the structuring. This being a high concept story, and those of you familiar with like Gargoyles and Avatar and, you know, all these other ones out there that are more high concept, you know, expansive worlds and stuff like that, you're going to have arcs where, you know, like your quote-unquote main character isn't the focal point. You can kind of spread it out with some of the other characters taking center stage, and it's fine because the world is the important turning point. I think a lot of times with low concept storytelling, the main character, whoever that may be, has to stay in focus the whole time. And with high concept stuff, you can kind of branch out. You know, you can think of Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, you don't have to follow the main cast. The whole fellowship splits up at one point, and they all go, you know, 15 different ways. And it's okay to focus on Merry and Pippin for a while. You know, we're fine with that. That's cool. You know, they can take up a lot of a movie. It's cool. They're in it to win it too. And we're rooting for them just as much as Frodo, and that's fine. So with Varulv, that combines with the fact that Varulv is being put online as a web comic, yes, but its main intent is to be a print comic. So the updates, by and large, can't always follow the structure of showing every character every time. it's not a fan comic, so I don't have to, you know, like adhere to a certain audience. It's going to expect one thing or the other if I want to, you know, get readers' eyes on it. I can go in and I can, you know, make it whatever I want because, you know, the canon is mine. And again, I'm saying it's not a fan comic, so you don't have to do this. Even if it is a fan comic, you don't have to do this. It's fine. You know, go your own way. It's cool. People should, you know what they signed up for after the first few pages, and they should be in for the ride, you know, then or not. And you just make the rules as you go along. It's totally cool, man. So that said, it's more similar to the thing that I showed in the layouts at the beginning, where, you know, I've got my page structures. Varlov has 6 pages every update. I'm going to be moving to 3 pages every update because I'm going to be moving 3 pages a week instead of 6 pages every 2 weeks. I hope. Cross your fingers for me. So it's going to look, you know, very similar to, you know, the default structure that I would see probably a lot of comic book people do, where, you know, you got page 1, characters A and C do the thing they said they do in the last episode. Page 2, characters A and C have a problem while doing the thing. Page 3, characters D and E, meanwhile, are doing something else. Page 4, characters D and E meet characters A and C. Page 5, character F shows up and tells everyone they need to go and find character B, who has gone missing. Finally, on page 6, do we ever see character B? And we cut to them, and they have just woken up on a desert island. And so, as you can see, if I'm breaking it down, you know, week to week, I'm going to have 3 pages where we're going to have mostly characters A and C, and one update of D and E. We won't see characters F or B. In fact, we won't even see B until down here, so at the very end. You might not get every character in every update, and that's okay too. But again, it's all in considerations of what you think is important and how you want to do things. With Death Comic, I wanted it to be, rest assured, this is a Death Clock comic, you know, for a while. After I kind of proved that for 200 some pages, only then did I venture into making just my own characters, you know, be the feature in it. So, you know, share the spotlight if you want to or don't. It's all up to you, but you might consider these things as you break down how you want your comic to go. I find this to be a good way of doing it, to focus on the canon cast. If you absolutely positively have to get eyes on your comic, or you're just starting out and you want people to read it, this is a great way of getting interest. This one is more if it's completely your own idea, or you just don't care about that other stuff and you just have, you know, an idea, feel free to do it this way too. But and this one too helps a lot when you have way too many characters to keep track of, and that seems to be my favorite thing to do. Make too much work for myself. So any questions on that, you guys? Anything? Hearing those words out loud is validating. No rules in fanfic. Amen, sister. Amen. No rules in fan fiction. This is fan fiction. We die like men. Oh, my throat is holding out good. Outstanding. Pro is typing. Happy birthday, Pro, once again. Happy birthday. This is Pro's comic chat, by the way. That's why we're doing this, because birthday. If it wasn't Pro's birthday, we wouldn't be doing this. Oh boy, is it easier to plot and format around an existing property with fanfic or with an original work? I think that's up to you as a writer. So this is fun. Depending on whether you love world building or hate world building, you might find fan fiction easier or harder. I think that plotting around fan fiction has always been easier for me, because again, a lot of the world is established. I have a very clear voice in my head for each character because I've heard it a million times. Even my own characters, you know, having been quote unquote with them for 10 years, I have very clear voices in my head. So I think it's familiarity. If I had to throw it away in one Pro, I really do. So again, what Neil was saying about doing little fan comics or comic strips, little comic strips, that kind of stuff is invaluable for getting to know your characters, even your own. Whether it's an original IP or you know, an original character for a, you know, for another IP, a licensed property. Um, Absolutely, you know, do your own little sketches like that. Start to hear those voices in your head. Start to feel out how they act. Start to put those guys in situations, because once you put those guys in situations, you'll start to get a sense of who they are. And I think that, again, you know, you don't have to have every little thing plotted out. I love those quizzes that we get on Tumblr, that, you know, they have the unusual character questions, you know, that we can answer now. And I know we all love taking those quizzes and answering them, because I think they're really important to really answer some tough questions about who they are. But I challenge you guys, you know, if you haven't done this already, and I know a lot of us have, take it a step further and take those prompts and turn them into whole stories and see where it goes. It's the best thing in the world. And I love to look at stuff like that, and to get ideas for a whole story that I could write around it. It's a great way of doing show don't tell. And there again, if you find yourself like at a loss for dialogue, if you find yourself unable to think of what somebody would say, you know, if you're having trouble getting into somebody's head, look at those kind of lists and really consider your answers on them, and really consider how that person would be. I like things like voice claims and face claims and things like that, because you start to get a sense of who a character is, outside of that two-dimensional writing, you know, bit that you've done, that outside of that just being on paper aspect. So that kind of stuff's really great if you want to work that way. But again, is it easier? Possibly, you know, with a fanfic, I think. But again, I think it has to do with familiarity. I can write Banshee better than I can write the characters in Varulf, but they're both mine. And it's because I've been around Banshee longer. I know them longer. And I've known the characters in Varulf for like going on 10 years too, you know. But it's still a lot, because I'm not I haven't done it in a while, and I'm kind of rewriting them in so many ways. And I'm still kind of figuring out who they are now. So and the only way to do it is to get practice with it. And the best practice is to write as much as you can. And it doesn't have to be long, but you should be writing, you know, just to figure these things out. So that's a great question. A lot of people get discouraged when they write a character one way. They start out so excited to write fan fiction. Okay, they get a character in their head, and they go for it, and they write this thing, and then they turn around, you know, maybe a year or 2 or 10 later, and they go, oh my god, I don't want to write this character this way anymore. And that's, you know what, that is fine. You can change. My characters look nothing like what they looked like 10 years ago. And maybe 10 years from now, they're not going to look anything like they looked in Death Comic. That's okay. Characters are allowed to change. That's fine. Make an AU. Make, you know, a revamp. You know, look at the Ninja Turtles. How many, you know, incarnations have they gone through over the years? It's great. I love that kind of thing. You know, the essence of the character will always be there. But it's fun to explore other ways that they could exist, and other ways that their story could come about. So it's tricky, but it's fun. So yeah, good question, baby. Good question. On to I guess the meat and potatoes of this thing when it comes to actual comics. Now we're going to separate a bit. Everything that I said up to this point, I think you guys could take and use, even if you're not doing a comic. You could do it for a story. And it would work just as fine. I mean, a lot of this stuff looks similar to how I would write prose. You know, if I was still doing, you know, prose fan fiction, it would be set up similarly. I'd be like, okay, well, this part, and then this part, and then this part, and you get these chunks, you know, these story beats, and then you'd like start writing around that story beat, saying, okay, let's carve this out, and you know, you just go from there, knowing that you had to hit this point and that point and that point in that particular chapter. So, I mean, feel free to use all of this stuff. It's good stuff for comics as much as it is regular stories. That's fine. Everything that goes on from here on out is pretty comic specific. I mean, we're going to touch on some things that are good storytelling. in general, and that's fine. And a lot of it is transferable. So you might see something else, say for a comic, you want to do this. You might say, well, gee, for my regular stories, I want to do that. That's great. You know, if you could take something out of that, that's great. Otherwise, here we go. Getting into the actual thumbnailing. What separates comic from a regular prose story is all of the art and all of the panels and the considerations of the comic book format that you have to do. And luckily, if you guys go over to my Discord, my Storyteller Sanctuary Discord, I've got all of these lined up. I did, over on Death Comic last year, tutorials, several of them, going over how to do comics. And I have them all lined up and listed out on my Storyteller Sanctuary forums in the Chordzy tutorial section. And you guys, again, as boosters of the Doomstar server, you get access to that. So enjoy. And I have links for them too here, some of the ones that are relevant to this document. I've got links, so I'm getting close to the end of the document here, but I promise there's more. So again, once you get to a point where, you know, maybe you've laid out pages 1 through 24, maybe you've only got a chapter of this, you know, where you've got some beats. Maybe you've done a whole freaking script like this thing, you know, that's great. Wherever you are and wherever you want to get started, like I said, get it started as soon as possible because you have plenty of time. Start getting a feel for this and start figuring out what your, you know, pitfalls are going to be, what your schedule looks like. The only other thing I'll caution is try to get 2 updates ahead before you post one, if you're going to try to do it in some kind of regular way. But if you're not going to keep to a schedule, which is how I did the first Death comic, that's fine. Just post it whenever you want to. And I highly recommend that. If you're going to do this, don't hold yourself to a schedule. I don't know how I kept to a schedule for Death Comic 2. I was freaking nuts. Apparently, you know, I suffered some kind of, you know, strange function in my brain that turned it on for an entire year to allow me to do that. That is very unusual for me. But if you want to, get several updates ahead so that you can, you know, put it out. Having a regular schedule does get you readers. And the closer together that they are, get you more readers. But it's a lot. It's a ton of work. And definitely don't do it if you've never done it before. Start with putting something out as you can, as you care to. And I have another kitty at my window. Kitty, kitty. Oh. And she ran away. She doesn't want to hang out. I get it. I get it. So here, the next part that I like to do, if I don't jump right in to just sketching out the whole page, which is kind of how I do it now, is thumbnailing. So an example of a thumbnail structure that I have is these tiny little drawings over here, just to show how the panel might look. They give me a nice overview overall of the whole page and how it's going to lay out. So up here I have the dino gag, which I didn't even bother to draw. Then we have General Crozier in his room full of guys, you know, and they're all watching the board over here. This is a very nice drawing of General Crozier. Close-ups over here. Here's Charles. Here's Charles again and Chris. And very nice drawings of Charles and Chris. But it doesn't matter because the point here is just trying to get it to look like it's going to flow. I want to make sure it's going to flow. This was a very difficult page for me to figure out how it was going to flow, so I did make a thumbnail before I went into drawing. A lot of times I will take to Photoshop and get the whole page up there, start, you know, spacing it out, see what I think could work, looking at what I have to cover at the time. So here's what I was working with. This is interesting. There's an example of the thumbnail and what I was going off of. So this is not broken down in any way, shape, or form. This was not even broken down to say that this is happening on a single page. These are story beats. This is straight up just story beats saying this has to happen, this update. And so this is 2 paragraphs of, you know, a several paragraph thing that said this is what this update's going to have in it. So it starts, Crozier beefs a room of dudes, a dozen or so guys. He states Deathclock seems to have amped up its security measures since the Gulf of Danzig attack, the stage converting itself into an escape rocket of sorts after their aerial assault. He's lost track of the girls and wants to wait to see if the tracking device he gave them finally comes online. Charles, meanwhile, is doing his best to track the stage, but confirmation from Chris reveals that all network communications within the stage are down, probably sustaining heavy damage. Charles orders to prepare a search team. Then it goes on to the next part, which this stuff about pickles and looking for cherry doesn't actually end up happening on this page. That actually, I ended up putting that on the next page. But there's a potential I could have put it on this page too. It seems that it just would fit here better. Sometimes looking at a whole paragraph, you can say, okay, pacing wise, that makes sense. And yes, I can fit it all into a page, so I might as well just make it one page. You know, make it easier on yourself, however that might be. But that's how I do it, guys. A lot of times I go off of a single paragraph that explains a page, you know, or a couple paragraphs that explain a page, and maybe I'll think in my head, well, this might need to be 2 pages, you know, or I can fit this whole thing into 1 page. That's fine. And again, that is how you want to do it. No right or wrong way there. That's just how I work. And you can see here, there's no actual dialogue. I say what needs to be said. I say what people will be saying. I give you know, enough clues to say, okay, well, he needs to say this, or he needs to imply this, because those are important plot points. We need to reveal them, and the audience has to know about them. But the actual dialogue is not there. Sometimes it is. This might have been an okay one to actually put the dialogue in, because he ends up saying a whole lot of stuff here. But I think most importantly was to explain what happened with the stage, because we didn't get a lot of that. The next thing over, so this is more of an exposition kind of a thing. So to that end, I tried as best with show don't tell as I could on this. We saw the stage blow up. Then we see Crozier informing his guys how the stage blew up and flew away, and what happened there. So I cheated. We didn't actually see that, but we did get Crozier explaining that. And it leads to Charles talking about it. So feel free to cheat if you need to. That's fine. Exposition panels are okay. Not always is it Charles that sits there and text walls for 3.5 pages, but sometimes it is. Again, like I said, it's a really good example, this one, about that. Try not to text wall and explain stuff. It's a visual medium. Go for the gusto. Make stuff cool. Get your audience, you know, hooked on it. But if you have to, like, that is a very complicated scene to show. I didn't feel like, you know, drawing that. And I admit to laziness because it's fan fiction. So, you know, whatever. Maybe if it was like an actual comic that they'd put out or something, and I was getting paid for this and I had more time, therefore, it would be a different story. But I felt this was a fine way of doing it. So, again, it's fan fiction. Do whatever you want. But generally speaking, the preferred method probably would have been to actually show the stage doing all this cool stuff. Missed opportunity, maybe, but again, that's a lot of effort, and I just wasn't feeling it. So, okay, so comics come with their own rules about what makes them easy to read and what elements are in play as you consider this stuff. And I have a whole tutorial about it. Let's go to that tutorial. Here we are, folks. So this one is Writing Comics in Junk Part 3 in Composition and in. There are 2 parts before this. They are a lot to do with what we covered in this little document, but they are also a little bit more on the long-winded about just general story writing side, and y'all know how to do that, so I kind of condensed it into what we have in the doc here. Made a little more specific to comics in general. So, comic book anatomy, if y'all don't know. A couple things that I like to show off in this little tutorial that are great. Get yourself familiar with comic book terms. This is a panel. This is a dialogue balloon or text balloon or a word balloon. And this is the gutter. The gutter is the space between the panels. There's just all kinds of nice little explanations of things like that here. So we got another kind of dialogue balloon, you know, movement line, sound effect, and a bear. That 7th one is a bear. And just more of the same through this. This one explains a lot of this stuff. So I think if you're not familiar with like terms and how you would want to write something out if you want to, especially if you want to become a comic book professional and a professional writer of comics, or you have interest in that, go ahead and check this out. This explains what everything is and, you know, how it all lays out. And these are important things to consider as you lay out your pages. As we talked about, dialogue takes up space. Unlike a cartoon, an animated show, you're gonna see the text. It's in front of you. It's something that you have to make space for. In fact, there's a whole to do on comic book lettering, and actually that reminds me, Blambot's got some really great ones. I will post them on my Storyteller server. So you guys can check those out, because lettering has its own set of rules. And we could sit here and have a whole lettering tutorial, and it would take me all night. I swear to God, it's a lot. But Blambot's got a good one. Condenses it down, makes it great for those of you who want to know a little bit more about the fine art of comic book lettering. And indeed, it is an art, and it's worth considering and doing well. And I'm more than happy to help you guys with that stuff too, because that's a little nuanced. So after all that terminology stuff, I get into how to lay out the panels and the best way to tell a story. If you don't know, and you probably already know this, if you're not a regular comic book reader, that's okay. I've got everything kind of laid out here for, you know, newbies as well as people who've done it for a million years. A comic book in these United States is generally read from left to right, top to bottom. So left to right first, so the panel goes here to here, up to this dialogue box, over to Grumpy Face. Then it goes down this panel, over to this panel. Then it goes down this panel, up to this panel. Now, you see the transition here, you know, down and to the right. Generally, the preferred way of doing it is to go down and to the right with your dialogue balloons as well. So even that thing about, you know, we're always moving to the right. We're always moving down. That has to carry over here. Can you have your dialogue balloons go up? Yes, it's fine. It's not a huge deal. That's a lettering nuance that preferably you would have them. So let's say Charles is here, and let's say this whole thing at the bottom is one panel, and we have like Nathan in the middle. Charles talking here would be split by Nathan in the middle here, and I think Nita could get away with saying something where the dialogue is up. Generally speaking, dialogue balloons, if there was one here and then there was one over here, we'd read this, and then we'd read this one, and then we'd read this one, and maybe if there's one over here, we'd read that one, this one, this one, this one, this one, to have like a back and forth. So again, there's nuances to this, but in a very, very general sense, you're going to be reading left to right, and then popping down, left to right, and then popping down, left to right. So keep that in mind. Try to keep things going left to right, and then down. Cool. I just kind of explained that here. Here we go with the thumbnails. There's actually a little link to somebody who had asked about that earlier. There's a further explanation about that. As you set up these pages, guys, the most important thing that you're going to want to look for is the scene. Every comic book page should have the scene. There might be times when you're just going to have tons of dialogue, or just there's not going to be the scene, you know, or maybe it's going to be a bunch of scenes that jump back and forth. That's okay. In that case, you're going to want to look at your dialogue, see which takes precedent, and if there isn't one, there's other ways that you can jump down to it. So you want to do an establishing shot in a comic. Every page should have some kind of every scene should have an establishing shot. And what I mean by that is a shot that says, this is where we are, this is where everybody is standing, this tells visually what's going on, and people can kind of set it up in their minds as happening from there. Then we can get into close-ups and, you know, other shots that, because we already know where everybody is. We also have the 180-degree rule. If you guys don't know what that is, the 180-degree rule is a little bit more explanation, and it's actually a cinematography thing, and it doesn't always apply to comics. Generally speaking, if you can write a horizontal line between, you know, two characters, that they don't cross that line where the camera is shot. So in other words, keep everybody on the same side. I don't always do this because sometimes you need to mix it up a little bit. Good example here, though. In this panel we have Nathan, in this panel we have Nita, so these don't count. They're single panels, single characters. But here, Nita's over here, Nathan's over here. So again, Nita's on the left, Nathan's on the right. Down here, Nita's on the left, Nathan's on the right. Down here, Nita's on the left, Nathan's on the right. Do these characters look similar enough that you would get this mixed up? No. I mean, I think they're pretty distinguishable as being two different people. However, the 180-degree rule is just a nice way of keeping your eye from getting confused. Like, wait, did they move? If they moved, that's okay. They can move. Maybe she moves over here. That's fine. If she's doing it for a reason. You know, maybe she's on the move. You know, she's got to pass him. Okay, that's fine. Now we know she's moving, and we look forward to seeing where she goes. Other than that, visually it would be actually a little confusing to you know, have him over here and her over here, because the camera has therefore, one would assume, moved behind them. So not a great setup. So the 180-degree rule, great for creating confusion if you want to break it. Otherwise, try to keep that in mind, and you know, we can explain that as we go on, but that's a cinematography thing, so it doesn't always apply to comics, but I find it helps quite a bit. So again, back to the establishing shot idea, especially as characters come into play, and into new areas, or new characters show up, or new scenes are established. We want to have one time that we can say, okay, this is where we are, and get the audience grounded, so to speak. So good times to set an establishing shot. Are we entering a new area? It'd be nice to have an establishing shot to establish exactly where that is. Is there any other important information we should be paying attention to? If you don't have the scene, and if you don't have a necessary need to establish where people are, consider focusing on the point in a page that'll otherwise have the biggest impact on the story going forward. These are scenes like, action scenes are great for this. Maybe like the biggest shot on the page. Maybe the biggest panel is not the establishing shot. Maybe the biggest panel on the page is somebody really socks somebody one right in the face. It maybe is somebody says something really impactful in the dialogue. Maybe an oh shit moment has happened and shit is hitting the fan otherwise. It doesn't always have to be the establishing shot, but pick the scene to be the biggest one. Otherwise, you could also pick the one with the biggest dialogue, the most amount of dialogue. That's fine too. No harm, no foul there. But these are considerations when laying out your thumbnail, and how it's going to go. Again, this one, most dialogue, biggest scene. And kind of an establishing shot too. We know that they're in a conference room. Crozier's over here talking to these guys. So that helps there too. Let's see. I don't know if there's anything else. This goes into what we're going to talk about in a minute here. Laying out a story in a way that best tells the story. You're going to look into changing the size of your characters, moving your camera around, and not cutting the characters off, and leaving more room than needed for your dialogue. So again, take these 4 considerations in mind as you make your comics. Stop there. So anybody else have any questions at the moment? Wow, we've been talking for like an hour and a half. I never shut up. I'm sorry. I'm always late. Fashionably late. And that's totally fine. You want to show that you're important? Be late to something. Alright. So, the next bit, and this is probably going to be, you know, like the largest bit that we can go over before, you know, wrapping this up, because the last pieces of this are really nuanced, but the biggest thing I can impart tonight with you guys is how to make your pages look cool. One of the best ways that you can do that is to, like we were saying, change up your angle, change up your character size, do that kind of thing. I would start with changing your character size. Changing character size, panel to panel, makes things look so much cooler. So if you can't change your angles, if you can't change, you know, like your camera or anything like that, you just want to make the biggest impact and you want to start small, change how big and small your characters are. So this is my little example of what a comic can look like in a very plain way versus a very dynamic and exciting way. Two examples here. These are the same page. These are exact same things going on, but it has changed up quite a bit. Again, there's references in my Storyteller server that show this kind of stuff, and one of them is Making Comics the Marvel Way, and a lot of books that you can get off of Amazon. They're really great. Or at your library. Go to your library. I'm sure they have them. A lot of places do. But you know, doing these little things, like changing this guy from just standing here to, oh, now the camera's slightly at an angle and it's more close up on him. Over here, these are just 3 guys. Well, maybe we move the scene just a little bit so that he's in the foreground, you know, way up front, and these guys are way back here. He's giving a thumbs up, nice, or, you know, it's centered on that thumbs up. He's in the city. Maybe we're seeing a shot of the city. These guys just laid out a little bit more close up, versus this, and just changing it up so that maybe we combine them even. I love this kind of thing. You can see again these angles are from the ground up versus they're just standing here, and maybe we change it so that instead of one and then he faces the camera, maybe he's so intense that we just kind of get it really close up to the camera and we just leave it as one panel. Keeping things interesting again. Change the size. You see this guy is a little bigger than that guy. This guy's the big, on the page. He's big. These are small. These guys are like a medium size. It makes a huge difference. So again, comparing this right layout with the left layout and the right layout, comics are more interesting. You should take the time to change up how your panels are laid out. So this goes into this one. And so I call this the art of sequential direction. So you can see our little panel here. You can click on this and get it, a little bigger. The page doesn't offer much in the way of variety, while the second page is chock full of it. It's not hard to understand why the second example looks and feels more exciting. So way more exciting than that. Consider, doing these kind of things. Again, changing the size of your characters. If you do nothing else, do this. Let's see. Changing the camera angle. Are we doing... Okay, following the horizon line is basically what this means. Is the horizon low? Is it high? Are we above the characters? Are we, below them? Are we riding on somebody's shoulder? That kind of stuff. Huge deal. Change it up. Your perspective. You're going to have to learn perspective if you really want to do this. Again, if you don't know perspective and how to do foreshortening and stuff on anatomy, it's okay. Totally get that. Keep working at it, though. That is an imperative if you're going to do this professionally. But if you do nothing else, change the size of your characters. And they could be, the same horizon line, so they're standing there, in the same field, but they're closer or they're further away. That's fine. Changing the panel's tilt, the Dutch angle, as we call it. That's all that's really going on here. This guy's sideways. He's just a little sideways. And sometimes, especially if you have like a very large character, they need to fit in a panel in an awkward way. So, if you want to show more of them, tilt them on their side. Why not? Change where the camera is so you can see more of them. If you have like a long panel like these ones, it's fine to have them slightly on their side. And it makes it interesting. And again, change the panel's tilts. Here we have an explanation too. This is what we were talking about before, of what an establishing shot is and when to use it, what a long shot is and when to use it. So these are names for certain shots that you get in your comic. An establishing shot, in this example we see Nathan is the head of the table and Charles' usual spot. Deathclock is one side, Banshee is on the other. Toki isn't shown, but that's the joke. Toki is so far away, his speech balloon is coming from off panel. So that actually helps to drive the joke to not have him here. Murderface is conspicuously absent. Establishing shots are important because they show the reader at a glance where everyone is and where they are in relation to one another in their environment. You should strive to have one establishing shot per scene. So per scene does not necessarily mean per page. Per page is great, but you don't have to. Some people say per page, and again, it's a lot of extra work, but at least do it once per scene, to kind of drive that home where they are and what's happening and where. A long shot can be an establishing shot. The camera's far enough away that most of the characters, you can see them. Most of their body is in the scene, if not all of their body is in the scene. So not only from this long shot can we establish where they are, we can even, line them up and see how small Nita is next to Nathan and that she's actually shorter than Pickles. And that Sparkles is somewhere in between these two. But, so it's one of those things like we've gone and done something far enough away that we can see all of the characters and we can see very well, what maybe they're up against. It's kind of creepy to be in, the dead manager's office. So, maybe it's them against the scene and setting the scene. The background should be treated as a character, as much as any given character is. So, and I feel that this kind of setup does drive that kind of emptiness of it. Charles's room is you know, it's not the full thing, but it's empty and it's kind of weird after the fire here. Let's see. Down here is a medium shot. These are pretty basic shots. You know, just here's a guy. He's talking now. Maybe he's saying something important. Maybe he isn't. Whatever's happening, it's not doing great impact. And that's the point. So you use these a lot. Just a guy. Here he is. And he's talking. Close-ups. Zeroing in on one or two characters' faces to the point where we're forced to consider their facial expressions. When something important is being said, you're going to do a close-up. When you're in somebody's head, when you're literally crawling up into their nostril, you're going to want to do an establishing shot, or you're going to do a close-up shot. These close-ups create, like, this says tension, they create emotion, they're great for showing, you know, feelings and, again, getting into a character's head. So use them and get as close as you want. You know, there's some panels, I think, in Death Comic where it's just focusing on, like, a character's lips or whatever. And that's fine. You know, if you don't need to see the eyes and what they're saying is important, or the lips are saying everything, that's fine. Do that. The extreme long shot. Sometimes the background's the most important thing, as it in this case. Hey, where'd my house go? So you want to do these things when you really want to establish what just happened in the world. You can go extreme long shot and just open up the whole background for the whole thing to see. So that's that one. Everything else after this, guys, is going to get, you know, a little nuanced. And I'm just going to kind of wrap it up, because by this point you should probably have a pretty good feeling for what this is all about and how to go about getting started. So this is now the extra credit portion of the show here. And don't be sad if you don't get this. This stuff is a little bit more tricky. So I get into the point with this other one. This is, I call this putting the pieces together. This is about setting perspective, point of view. We talk a lot about characters and getting in their heads. We talk about head hopping. And head hopping, if you don't remember, you weren't there for that conversation, or you just otherwise don't know, is when you have, in a story, something being told from one perspective, and suddenly you're jumping into somebody else's head, and it feels like it's being told from their perspective instead. You're going from character to character, and that's generally considered a bad thing. You should have one perspective per scene, and you should be, quote-unquote, riding on somebody's shoulders. Even in an omniscient point of view, it should be established that you're either in nobody's head or in one person's head. And it's a tricky business, because that's not a hard and fast rule. In fact, that's not a rule at all, but it's kind of one of those to make it easier on yourself and to make it easier on your reader. Comics have a very similar kind of thing that we do, where we actually do have a perspective. Despite the fact that you're omniscient and you're seeing this all go down before your eyes, there are points of time when you're going to literally get into a character's head and actually be writing with them. And you have to establish who that is and how that story is going to be driven with them. So again, this is tricky stuff. Don't feel bad if you don't get this. This is something, though, if you really want to get a little more advanced, or you have a very important part in your story, you want to really drive home and you want to make it that much more impactful, you know, consider doing this and consider studying this. That's the best thing I can say. Study this. Study how other comics do this. And look at my example again if you want to get, you know, on board with this. So who or what is in the driver's seat? I'm just going to, you know, go over this. If I was going to write a story from an omniscient point of view, I might phrase a paragraph like this. Charles stood atop a bridge in Copenhagen, looking at the hard-won keycard in his hand. He didn't know it, but somewhere else in the city, a doctor was taking care of his partner. Now, if I wanted to write that similar thing, framed in a limited perspective, where we're only in Charles' head, that's all we get. We just know Charles. We don't know anything else. It would look like this. Charles stood atop the bridge, his muscles aching from the fight that he just endured. It was worth it, though. The keycard in his hand proved it. He can only hope his partner had also survived. He has no idea. So that's, you know, that's the differentiation here. We say that the doctor is taking care of her here, and we say that he has no idea if she's alive or dead here. To do this in a comic is an imperative in this story's case. I need to establish some tension where Charles is not sure if Kai is dead or alive. So in order to do that, what I did is I went into the story here, and I've got this blocked out. The red parts, and this is from the same page, mind you. These panels line up exactly as you see them here on Death Comic. The red panels are Charles' perspective. The blue panels are Kai's perspective. So we see him talking. He's calling her on the phone. He's leaving her a message. She's not picking up. He says, you know, I'm not condoning your recklessness, but please call me, please. And I assume he leaves the message. Immediately after, I open to switch over perspectives to her by putting us literally behind her eyes. We are seeing her doctor come into view in this panel, and then he's fully in focus here. And then we back up, and we're actually on the doctor's shoulders, and we're seeing her. And we have established that, you know, the story has now been taken over from this perspective. It was being driven by Charles here. It's being driven by Kai and this doctor down here. And that's how you do it in a comic. These little things, these little nuances, these little transitions are important. People quite easily handle this in an omniscient point of view. If you want to tell the audience what someone is doing, then the very next sentence reveal what someone on the other side of town is doing. That's not a problem. But in a limited perspective, we wouldn't know anything about this. We just end it here and be like, well, I hope she's okay, and move on. And that's fine if that's the kind of point that you're driving here. But we don't want any mystery here. We have to start telling this story. So that's how we carried it over. Transitions are important, just like they are in a story. When you end a part of a story, it should somehow, even if it's completely unrelated, tie into the next part. Try your best. That stuff is tricky, but you know, if you pull it off and you practice it, you will get better at it. We leave you hanging on Charles there. He doesn't get a resolution. Nobody picks up. We're left to understand that his part in the story has ended. We start the next panel on a new line. So that's the other thing. I didn't start it up here. I didn't start, you know, cut the panel in half here and start, you know, opening her eyes over here with the blurriness. I could have, but that would have probably been too jarring. It's very clear that I've started it on a new line down here. Starting things on a new line, starting things on a new page, starting, you know, like leaving something hanging, you know, before it gets a big impact on like the next page is another huge part of storytelling. And that's a different kind of transition. That one's intentionally jarring. But these little breaks should tell the reader very clearly that something is now different. Something has changed. And you should pay attention to this. This is now coming from another point entirely. And more so than, we've got a little dialogue box that says elsewhere, and that's fine. That leads it, but you should know that regardless. Another rule of thumb that I can point out with that in mind, guys, for these kind of things is, it was told to me a long time ago that if your comic can be read without the dialogue, without the boxes, without anything in there, and you still get it, it's successful. That can't always be done. You won't always know the nuances. But if you generally get a good grasp on the story, who's telling it, who's in the driver's seat, you know, where it's coming from, you know, you're doing a good job. So you should be able to do this kind of thing without the dialogue boxes. Now, you won't be able to necessarily do that right off the bat. But again, if you study this stuff long enough and you read it honestly before you put that dialogue in, and you tell yourself that you can or you can't, that'll solidify that for you. So if you can do that, give that a try too. So again, that's a lot of that. Perspective and things like that in comics, really tricky. And some of these techniques are a little bit more advanced than others. But again, I've got these little things pointing to these posts. And again, if you go back to my other server, then you will see them all lined up there. So yeah, I mean, that's basically all I have for us tonight. And I'd love to continue this on later with further topics and more on comics and stuff like that. So please, you know, like send me any questions that you guys want to see, any questions that I didn't cover, anything else that you want to know. I'm more than happy to cover anything to do with comics. So yeah, I think that's where we'll end it for tonight. Do you guys have any questions for me? You can put them in the chat or turn your mics on or whatever you like. I'm down. Thanks again to Pro for having a birthday so we could do this. A++. Ooh, extra pluses. Extra positivity, babies. Loving it. And I want to thank you guys for being here. I'm really glad that y'all come out for this kind of stuff. I love talking about comics. I'll sit here and talk all night. It'd be really annoying. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining me. Again, I'm going to drop a link to my server in general, I guess. And yeah, if you didn't get the guy, once again, here is the guy. He is shareable. Go ahead and have him. But yeah, thanks for coming. We'll do another one of these. I'm gonna, you know, figure out a few more things, but certainly if you guys have questions about comics and stuff like that, I'm more than happy to go over it. I got a couple ideas. In fact, as I was gonna go and do some videos, like short videos on YouTube explaining some things as we go. Maybe is my OBS still recording? I wonder if it did. Oh my god, it did. Wild. That's weird. So yeah, I'm gonna cut out voices and stuff, but other than that, thanks for being here so I can share this, and probably do some like art over top of it as I talk. But that's the kind of stuff I'll be posting on my YouTube channel, because I do have a few things that come to mind as I write Varl, especially now, and do more Death Comic. Start to work out Death Comic 3 already. It's insane that I'm working on that. I just have so much that I find I want to talk about. So as I do that, maybe I can gather some of those things up and not just make videos, but we can have comic chats over that, and I'd love that. So again, join me in my new little server to get those tutorials. You guys are always welcome. That stuff will be free for you. All right, guys, I'm gonna go back to the lounge, and yeah, thanks for coming, and we'll see you out there later.